President Joe Biden's legacy of crimes committed by illegals. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Listen to this headline from the New York Times just in the last few weeks. Remember, this is the New York Times, the Biden butt-kissing New York Times. Biden wanted to fix immigration, but leaves behind a system that is still broken. Can you imagine the difficulty of the New York Times editors having to actually post that headline? That tells me it's so bad that even the New York Times can't deny it. Before I get into more of this, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app. At Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, where, guess what, you may also subscribe to my newsletter. It's called Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley. Just go to WashingtonTimes.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, find the newsletter section, and click on it. And there you will be transported to a page with all the wonderful podcasts that the Washington Times puts out. And there are tons. There really are some really great podcasts you should check out. But the one I want to promote, of course, particularly is mine. It's Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley. Click on it. All you have to do is enter your email address and you will get delivered right to your email box. You don't have to do a thing. Just sit there and open your email, right? How easy peasy can it get? And you will get delivered right to your email box my Monday, Wednesday, and Friday newsletter. It contains all the commentaries that I write at the Washington Times, as well as my Tuesday and Thursday Bold and Blunt podcast, as well. Yes, the list goes on. Imagine that. It's like Christmas early. Anyhow, also contains my video podcasts that I do on occasion. I never know when I'm going to do them. It's more a sort of impulse thing. But I usually do have some really good interviews with a guy from Israel. He's an American citizen living in Israel, been there for years and years. He was a Wall Street expert. Now he's a journalist, but he deals firsthand with all things Israel. He's on the ground, taking shelter whenever their alarms go off and everything. So if you want live coverage coming right from the ground of Israel, you do want to tune into those video podcasts. Anyhow, back to Bold and Blunt, which, by the way, you can also get wherever podcasts are available. I love this headline. Let's read it again. It's like the gift that keeps on giving. Biden wanted to fix immigration, but leaves behind a system that is still broken. The New York Times just slapping us in the face with the truth, right? Understated though it may be. That is still broken. The system is broken. Come on now. It was broken day one. It's decimated. It's open. The border is open. President Biden's legacy will largely legacy. There's so many failures to choose from when you think of President Biden's legacy, right? Where do you start? The list is long. Can't wait to see his library, right? All those pictures of all the people we left behind in Afghanistan, all the photographs, people clinging to the airplane. That should be the welcome room. That should be plastered around the lobby. President Biden's legacy will live long and prosper, no doubt. Back to New York Times. President Biden's legacy will largely be limited to his success in lowering border crossings. But his approach has drawn criticism, and some of his actions have moved the problem deeper into the country. Well, bless their little hearts at the New York Times for just coming up with the most creative, polite way to talk about how Joe Biden has basically screwed over the legal American citizens and gifted illegals many, many, many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands with criminal backgrounds who come to America with God knows what nefarious intents in mind, gifted them with all kinds of taxpayer entitlements and taxpayer-funded benefits and so forth. So bless the New York Times' little hearts for coming up with that very creative, soft and friendly, though appearing so unbiased and truthful way of putting Joe Biden's failures. Here's the lead. This is funny too. President Biden had big ambitions for remaking America's immigration system, right? Because why Why allow something that's working so well to go forward without fixing it, right? I mean, Donald Trump had big ambitions for remaking America's immigration system that had failed under Barack Obama. And Donald Trump came in, and guess what? He did remake America's immigration system in a way that benefited the American citizens. President Biden had big ambitions too, but it was in a way that benefited the illegals and the criminal element of the illegals especially. So, potatoes, potatoes. They both had big ambitions. That Donald Trump's benefited the American citizens. I guess the New York Times doesn't want us to focus on the fact that Joe Biden had opposite intents to benefit the illegals. They just want us at the New York Times to focus on the fact that big ambitions was President Biden's goal. He said he would secure the border. He promised to make the asylum system work, reading from the New York Times again. He vowed to protect dreamers. On the first day of his presidency, he proposed legislation to create a path to citizenship for millions of undocumented immigrants. Isn't that nice? Amnesty. That was his big ambition. All right, that's enough of the New York Times. We get where they're going with that. Bend over backwards and make it seem as if Joe Biden wanted so very badly to secure the border. And it was just dumb luck that he could not. So let's look to the Heritage Foundation. They wrote this piece, this analysis, March 2024. Biden's border crisis comes to the suburbs. Now, here is Joe Biden's true legacy. Let me give you the key takeaways that Heritage writes on this. Number one, conservatives have warned for years that Biden's open borders and mass releases would bring increased crime and cost American lives. Legacy number one. Legacy number two, all the crimes were only possible because open border policies allowed the perpetrators to enter or remain in the U.S. illegally. Joe Biden's legacy. Point number three, Mayorkas should rescind his enforcement priorities memo and allow ICE to get on with their job of arresting and deporting alien criminals. Imagine that. An immigration control agency actually freed up and allowed to control migrants entering our country, actually freed up to do their jobs. Legacy number three for Joe Biden. Fail, 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 epic fail. And I have a guest with me today who has not just looked at the politics of Joe Biden's border failures, but actually looked at the data that shows, in fact, Joe Biden's border failures are even worse than we all thought and knew. His name is John Lott. You know him for his data analysis on Second Amendment issues, and he has a new report out where he tracks the crimes committed by illegals. And guess what? Thankfully, Donald Trump is president. That's all I can say. John Lott, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. So great to have you here.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So you are a top researcher on Second Amendment issues, what the federal government puts out in terms of stats versus how those stats are skewed through the media. And I wonder if you can talk about your latest data findings.
Right. Well, I mean, if you're talking about the stuff that I'd done on crime by illegal aliens.
Yes.
One thing, basically the costs of it are huge in the United States. We had this letter that had been released by the deputy for ICE about a month or so before the election, where they acknowledged that of the 7.4 million so-called non-detained individuals, these were individuals that had been processed by ICE and then released into the country. 9% of them, or 662,000, had criminal records. And about two-thirds of those had actually been convicted of crimes in their home countries. And then you had another 200,000 which had been charged but had escaped without being able to get caught and convicted. And one of the things, I mean, first of all, the 9% number is a real underestimate of the problem, and that is about 80% of those 662,000 were individuals who had voluntarily turned themselves in at the border for processing. It doesn't seem like that's the group that one should be most concerned about. 20% were ones that were caught, and you imagine those would be more likely to be concerned. But there's two other groups. There are so-called gotaways, which are another 2 million during the Biden administration, which we see coming across, but we didn't catch. And then there's untold millions, which we didn't see. I mean, one of the big problems was that we had a large number of border agents that were pulled off of guarding the border and instead were processing those that were coming in. And the administration had also admitted that about 30% of the passive monitoring equipment that they have on the border was broken and had not been fixed. So there was large areas of the border where we had no way of even trying to see whether somebody was coming across. And those, the ones that didn't voluntarily turn themselves in, those millions, are likely to be the ones that we should be most concerned about. People with criminal records would likely avoid the border, simply, turning themselves in simply because they would fear that they'd be most likely stopped from coming into the country. And so that 662,000 is presumably a large underestimate of the problem that we face there.
So Democrats and their friends in the media to this day like to dismiss the idea of illegals coming into America and committing egregious crimes as a fabrication of right wingers. But some of these illegals have committed some really horrendous crimes, and I wonder if any come to mind right now that you could detail.
Oh, I'm sure there's lots of them that people could talk about. You had the Lake and Riley case, where her murderer, who was a member of a really violent Venezuelan gang, had raped and murdered her, bashing her head in with a rock. He was just convicted in Georgia recently. He committed crimes in the United States. He was processed multiple times by the Biden administration and let go. Now, one of the things that people need to understand is kind of how the processing changed during the Biden administration compared to the Trump administration. During the Trump administration, where you had the Remain in Mexico policy, the Customs and Immigration Service would go and do the background checks on individuals, including contacting the home countries for those individuals to go and see whether they have things like criminal records. Under the Biden administration, ICE processed these individuals. And the problem is that ICE never contacts the home country for the individuals that were there. And on top of that, they didn't have access to all the databases, all the other databases that the Customs Service has. And so, they missed a lot of people's backgrounds for coming in. Now, one of the other things also is the Trump administration, if they couldn't trust the government, or the government was unable, foreign government was unable to go and provide things like criminal backgrounds for individuals, they, stopped people from those countries coming into the United States. The Biden administration had no such restrictions on things. So, even this 662,000 number is likely to be an underestimate for multiple reasons. And the other thing is, there's really two other points. One is the Biden administration has said they were just so overwhelmed by people coming across the border that they really didn't even use the limited checking ability that they had for many of these individuals. And on top of that, you've had people in ICE and the Border Patrol openly acknowledging to Congress that they were kind of had pressure on them from the Biden administration to hide some of the illegals and terrorists and others that they caught coming across the border, to underreport those numbers.
Because you deal, excuse me, in data and numbers, I'm just curious what your assessment of the level of danger and threat to American citizens is, based on what you said about the underreporting that is probably part and parcel of the numbers of illegals we know. How dangerous has America become for American citizens due to illegals crossings?
Well, I mean, we've had a huge increase in violent crime during the Biden administration. If you look at the numbers from the Bureau of Justice Statistics for the National Crime Victimization Survey, during the 3 years of the Biden administration that we have these numbers, overall felonious violent crime increased by 55%. There was a 42% increase in rapes, a 63% increase in robberies, and a 55% increase in aggravated assaults. That's the, that's the largest increase over 3 years that we've seen over any 3 year period in the 51 years that the Bureau of Justice Statistics has collected that data. That's
Wow.
by far the largest percentage increase. The next largest percentage increase was a 27% increase in like 2006. This was huge, and even if you compare it to the period from 2019 on as the base, before COVID, you're still talking about a 19 percentage point increase, which is the second largest 4 year increase that we've had over any 4 year period of time. So, I mean, these are really large numbers, and they coincide with the huge increase that we've had in these illegals that are coming in. Obviously, there are other reasons in terms of cutting back funds for police, huge retirements for police, bail reform, relatively liberal judges releasing large numbers of inmates. We've had other changes, prosecutors, Soros prosecutors in many parts of the country refusing to prosecute violent criminals. So we've had many things going on at the same time. It's hard to disentangle them. One thing I will say is, if you take the criminal records for the 662,000 and assume that they commit one crime similar to what's listed by ICE, and just so you know, only the most serious crime. Most criminals, the vast majority of criminals, commit many crimes, not just the most serious one that they commit. The National Institute of Justice has done work that's kind of estimated the cost to victims of crime in terms of things like medical costs, lost wages, pain and suffering. And they only have done this for about half the crimes that we have listed for these illegals. What you find is that the victimization cost in the United States comes to about $166 billion. And just to kind of put that in perspective, there's a group recently that got a huge amount of attention for estimating the cost to deport 1 million illegals. So and it was like 88 billion. If you kind of prorate that, say, okay, well, what would it cost to deport the 662,000 that we have? That's over $50 million. So, we have victimization costs from these illegals of extremely conservatively 166 billion, and the cost for deporting them would be 50 billion. And I think these estimated costs of deporting them is greatly over exaggerated, but let's just assume it's right. So the victimization costs are easily more than 3 times the costs of of deporting those criminal illegal aliens.
It pays for itself, basically, and then some. And I was listening with interest to the list of other causes you gave for the surge in illegals, and it all seems to me tied to Democrat policies and Democrat agendas, which leads me to the next question. The incoming Republican administration, Donald Trump, you've got Pam Bondi, you've got Tom Homan, you've got Kristi Noem leading some of these new border control policies. How quickly do you see the switch between the Joe Biden open border and the incoming administration's new law and order approach? Will that be something that we see quickly in the numbers, in the decreases of crime, do you think?
Well, I mean, you have this huge number that's already in the United States. I think you'll see some changes immediately. President Trump has already threatened Mexico with 25% tariffs if they don't get a hold of the surge of illegals coming across the border. And obviously, there's a huge amount that both Mexico and Canada can do with regard to that. And it looks like both countries have agreed to start controlling the flow of illegals coming across the border. So at least, you're likely not to have the continued increase that we've had in terms of illegals being here, criminal illegals. If they go back to the remain in Mexico policy, at least they'll do a much better job of checking these individuals that they do let into the country before they let them in. So, I'm optimistic on those things. Obviously, there are already reports that illegal aliens in the United States are kind of moving to sanctuary states and cities across the country. And if you don't have the support of local law enforcement, it makes it more difficult for you to, with the limited federal resources, to go and apprehend those individuals. It's my understanding that John Thune has announced that one of the first package that they're going to try to get through reconciliation is going to involve resources for dealing with the illegal alien problem that we have, and obviously that will help. I don't know how quickly they'll be able to get that through. Obviously, we have a very razor thin margin of control in the House. But all those things will matter. But there are lots of executive orders that Trump can put in place right away and have things like border agents go and actually monitor the border rather than processing individuals. All those things will help.
So let's just finish up with this last question, and it's not specifically a data-oriented question, but I'm just curious. You must have an opinion on it. How would it look? How feasible is it that Donald Trump has promised one of the largest deportation initiatives in American history once he takes over in the White House? And I'm just wondering, the pushback has already started. The politics are going to be vicious on this, and the public relations are going to be just as vicious. I just wonder, how successful do you think he will be in achieving that promise, and what would that look like? Is it feasible to task the feds to do such massive sweeps of illegals and deport them?
I mean, we've had large numbers of deportations under the Obama administration. We had deportations under Trump, obviously. We had deportations under previous administrations. The thing that's been unusual under the Biden administration has been, we just haven't been deporting people. We've had this huge influx that are in. Obviously, previous administrations have had even larger deportations than occurred under Obama. But life continued during those administrations when we had millions of people being deported. It wasn't like there was wall-to-wall news coverage on the deportations that were occurring. My guess is the vast majority of deportations occurred without any news coverage or people even kind of knowing that that's what was going on. I think this may be somewhat different this time, simply because the media is so politicized, and they will look for these types of things, and the Democrats will make an issue of it. But I think that just points out the fact that the Democrats have wanted, it's been a conscious result to have this huge increase in the number of illegals coming in. One of the things, I just saw this week that Iowa had tried to get had access to databases from the federal government that would allow them to check whether people on the voting rolls were in the country illegally or not, and the Biden administration will get access. Ohio had tried this, had the same problems before. You had Virginia, which had to sue and go to court to be allowed to remove people who had self-identified as illegals from the voting rolls. We're not even talking about people that they had discovered, but people that had self-identified and had been given the chance to go and correct it, and had corrected that information that they had provided themselves. And the Biden administration didn't want to let Virginia remove those self-identified illegals from the voter rolls. So, the national media hasn't covered that very much. But my guess is that just shows you the biases in the media. And I assume they'll cover this other quite extensively.
Which is what makes your work so important, because when you're looking at the actual data, the numbers, the figures, it's hard to dispute. It's hard to skew that. So I want to thank you for the work that you do, your ongoing work, and thank you so much for your time on Bold and Blunt. John Lott, President of the Crime Prevention Research Center. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you. I greatly appreciate your time.
And that's another Bold and Blunt. Remember, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. In the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience in their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's LIBSYN, ads.com today.